So the first thing I needed to do was draw some straight lines. I couldn't find a ruler, so I'm actually using the back of a scratch card. Yes, I know, but I wanted to get this tutorial done and just to see how it turned out really, so I just grabbed what I had to hand. So you just want to draw as many lines as you want. I didn't want them too thick, but I also didn't want them too thin. So what have I drawn here? 4 lines straight across. And then you want to draw the vertical ends of the boards as well. In hindsight, I might have done this in pencil because they show through the alcohol markers as I go through, you'll see. So I may do this again and do this in pencil and then go over it in pen at the end, but we'll see. I'm not so fussed with it, but it's just an idea I might change next time I do it. Okay, so now moving on to my first colour. Now I'm using a dark brown Ohuhu marker here. You just use whichever dark brown you have. I'll put the colour codes in later in the video so you can see the colour combination I'm using. But you just want to get a good base down on your page for this. And this is my practice for one of the pages I've got. I've got a bathroom page and I've done a green wood wall for the back of the bathroom, and people have suggested a dark brown floor. So this is my trial to see what it looks like. And you just get a good layer of colour down here. They don't have to be equal because floorboards aren't. So once you've got your base down, moving on to my next colour, I'm using 2 shades of grey here. So this is kind of the lighter shade of grey. And I'm putting sort of a base grain pattern on. I will build this up with a darker grey later. But it's just to give sort of an aged and a couple of tone sort of effect to the floorboards themselves. I'm not following any standard pattern, just randomly putting some grain lines on. When I do the second layer of this later, I'm not following the same pattern because it becomes ever so light as it dries. But as I said, it's just to give sort of depth to the floorboard itself. I'm going to try and do this effect with some twin markers, Deco Time twin markers. My daughter has these, so I'll borrow them off her and see if I can do this as well with those. Because I like to try the different styles of markers to see if the effects come out the same and the overall result, whether it looks similar or different, because different markers bleed differently, they give different amounts of ink on the page, etc. So it'll be interesting to see. And they're just putting the last few lines on the last couple of floorboards there on the page. As you can see, the ones at the top have started to dry already. And like I said earlier, they get quite light, but it's just to add a slight effect of grain on the page on each floorboard. And then with the dark grey, shortly once that comes in, that will add, again, another layer of depth. And now the grain's done, I'm just going to add a little bit of shading to the floorboard joins themselves. So adding a kind of, I don't know really what you call it, but as kind of a C and then a backwards C on the end of each of the floorboards, just to add the ends of the wood and the shading. So I'm doing that in all the joints. Then I'm going to go across the horizontals as well, just to add a bit of shading and colouring into those. And I'll go over this again in a bit because obviously those that, that use alcohol markers know you can layer your colours quite a bit and it can affect the overall shade that's given at the end quite a bit. It's not too much because the dark brown soaks up a lot of the pigment of these greys, but it still adds that extra depth, and it's up to you how much layering you want to do. And this is it where I go in with that second layer. So it's just, I'm not following exactly lines as I did before, but a little bit more narrow, just so you have, again, those sort of that layer and the depth to each of the floorboards. And you can see it here starting to layer up with different shades on the floorboards, but also you can see the black pen still showing through, hence why I was like, I'm not sure, I might do it in pencil next time I do it, when I do it on the page, and then go over with black towards the end if I want a bit more definition. So I think I'll do it that way round come the actual page itself. And now moving on to the darker shade of the grey. So this is the second colour of grey that I'm going to use. And like I said, I'll write the code colours shortly towards the end of the video, but whichever dark grey you have, it just needs to be a shade or 2 darker than the one you've just used. And here I'm creating where the floorboards are fixed to the floor themselves, so sort of the nail holes, as you will, for the floorboards. And the same with everything else on here, I'm adding extra depth to it, so I'll go over those again shortly. So now I'm writing the codes in. So for the dark grey, you've got CG70, for the lighter grey, you've got GG60, and for the brown I've used E310. And like I mentioned earlier, now I'm using the dark grey to go over and add the wood grain in once again, just to add again a bit more depth and a bit more layer to these floorboards themselves. So they look more weathered, they look older, and they don't look like brand new floorboards that have just been put down. I'm not following the same pattern. I'm just, adding the grain lines as my brain imagines they'd be. So you can do all sorts of patterns. You can do knots, you can do lines. They come in at all angles. So it's just whatever you fancy on your wood board, just to give it that effect. I did wonder about doing these with my black pen to add them a bit darker and a bit harsher lines, but I decided against it for now. I'll see what it looks like once it dries, and then work out whether I want that effect on the page, the completed page that I'm doing in my book. But I'm not sure. I think I'll still stick to the grey alcohol markers for this. So moving on to one of the final touches, so the floorboard, the nail holes that I created, I'm just going to go over those with a black pen. And again, I'm keeping those dots ever so slightly smaller than what I did with the dark grey alcohol marker. Again, just to give it, I keep saying depth in this video, but to give it that depth and shadow, so it looks older and it looks aged. So I'm just going to go all over those and put those on, and then using the dark grey that I've got in shortly, I'm going to pick that up and go over the lines for the floorboard, so the join lines, so the verticals and then the horizontals. And the black pen still shows through, but it's not as bad as I thought it would be, but I still might do, like I said, go over it with pencil first and then go over with the pens. And there you go, that's my final dark wood floorboards. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'd like to see your efforts if you try this.